Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in a minute as people join. And Katie, special shout out to you for taking the time on a Saturday to be with us. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Happy to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Is that everyone, John? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we get underway and people can join as they roll in. Thank you all for taking the time to be with here us this morning. We're talking about SPJ 21. Before I kick it over to John to walk us through a presentation that will include some of the feedback we got from the last virtual conference, as well as the survey results of our membership for what they hope to see in 21, and some thoughts from Katie about what's possible in New Orleans and what a hybrid situation might look like. I just want to say thanks for again for joining us. In the interest of time, I'm sorry there's a leaf blower outdoor. If you can hear that, I apologize. I think what I'll do is we'll go through the staff presentation and then take public comment on 21. And depending on how many people I want to talk, and because we've already had a survey, I may limit that to 1 minute per person. And then we'll go around and have a board discussion. And hopefully at that point, board members will have thoughts and we can have a conversation. But what I'd really like to do this time is to go around kind of sequentially the board in the interest of time and just see what people's thoughts are kind of one time through, and then maybe come to a decision. And so with that as a setup, John, why don't you take it away? Thanks so much.
Point of order, Matt, don't you need to call the meeting to order and have roll call first?
Thank you.
I was just about to say that. I'm like, I was about
I appreciate
to point my
the
finger.
formality. I'd like to call the meeting to order 2 minutes ago. And let's have the roll call. Yvette, could you please do that?
Sure. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Lauren, for jumping in with that, because I was about to as well. We roll call Matt Hall.
I am here.
Rebecca Aguilar.
Here.
Here, Yvette Davila Richards, Lauren Barlett,
Here.
Jerry McCormick,
Here.
Rafael Almeida, Raphael.
He's here. He said he had to step away for a minute, but
Got him. I
he's in
just
the
seen him
background.
before. Claire Regan.
Here.
Hello. Baylene Shaw.
Here.
And Yvette Walker.
Stephanie Overman.
Here.
Joined the meeting.
And we are done with roll call. You can take it away, John.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see everybody here today. So I want to introduce you to, before we get into a quick slide presentation, that's all part of the board materials as well. But we have a few staff members on the call kind of helping to provide expertise and thoughts around, this decision making happening today. Many of you have met Karen Sneath, our Director of Education. She is the staff lead around our conventions and events. Jake Koenig is here. He is our controller and can help speak from a financial perspective. We have a couple other staff members on the line as well. I can see Billy O'Keefe and Linda Hall, and Zoe Berg is here as well, and she'll be taking minutes of the meeting. So welcome to all of them. But then I'd like to do a special introduction. We have entered into a contract with Katie Riggs to be our event planner, essentially, or our convention coordinator. And she's been on the task for several months now and is doing a great job. But since many of you of the board may not, she was in a meeting with us once before, but just as a reminder, I'd like Katie to quickly just introduce herself and tell a little bit, 2 minutes maybe, about herself so we get a sense of her.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for, having me join you today. So like John said, I'm Katie Riggs, and I am your meetings and event consultant that's in contract with SPJ. I am the owner and chief event designer here at Riggs & Co., my own independent firm. I've worked in the meetings and event industry for almost the last 20 years. It's what I went to university for, and have various designations in the industry for all levels of professionalism. I've worked with associations and corporations for the majority of my career in different facets. And for about 11 years of my career, actually worked with about 17 different associations at an AMC, working with all of their contracting, all of their meetings, events, working with their hotels and their vendors, safety, security, whether they were virtual, live, et cetera. And then moved to my own firm about 2 years ago, where I do still work with a variety of clients, association, corporate, small independent, managing all of their logistics, strategy, and contracting and execution of their events. So I am deep in the industry. It's all I've ever done is meetings and events, from education to my whole professional career. So I'm really just here to lend support and provide any information or details on questions that you guys have as we chug forward for 2021.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I'm going to share my screen at this point. Can you see SPJ 21 convention on the screen? Okay. So want to walk through a couple of pieces of information, and then, then we'll start our discussion. This is to help sort of just frame the discussion. So something to keep in mind is today, we are basically looking at a couple of different options today on February 20th, 2021. And today we're needing to decide, are we going to continue to pursue a hybrid model and revisit this issue of retaining the hybrid model or moving to all virtual at a later date, such as our next board meeting on April 17th? Or are we going to decide today to pivot to an all virtual event today, which would mean that we would have to accept upwards of a financial penalty that could be $146,000. So those are basically the two choices in front of us. The factors in making those decisions, of course, are member safety, fiscal responsibility, risk and liability, organizational success. All those factors they don't compete with each other, but they are, need to be prioritized at different times based on the situations that we find ourselves in. And all those values are, important to all of us on the board and on staff, of course. So we need to be cognizant of each one of those. And so we need to ask ourselves which options are affected most by which factors as we think through the decision making today. I want to share with you sort of the results, just overall results of our convention planning survey. And by the way, are you seeing on the top now SPJ 2021 convention planning survey results? Somebody nod, or Katie Riggs, can you see that? Okay. When I have two screens here, sometimes I'm not sure if my slides are advancing the way I want them to. So basically, to kind of go over our respondent, I won't read all this to you. We had fairly decent response to the survey, 318 people, and you'll see that some of the breakdown there of what the respondents reflect as far as their experience with conventions in the past, et cetera. And I also just want us all to keep in mind too that a survey like this is already an interesting endeavor in that in any given year, a convention for an organization is not something that you can expect or should expect every member is going to choose to attend, no matter what. It's a way some members choose to engage with the association. Some members don't choose to engage that way. And in any given year, you usually have to sell the experience to the members. You sell that by saying, here's the great speakers we're going to have. Here's the great location. Here's what the agenda is. Here's some of the different experiences we're having. So at this point, this survey was basically addressed without any of that selling or persuading necessarily attached to it. So in a typical year for SPJ, based on what we can analyze, we get about 10% of our members to attend a convention. Last year, we saw an uptick. So we had about 13% attend a virtual only event. So I want us to keep those things and those thoughts in mind as well as we go through this. So to the meat of the questions, this question was, if there wasn't a pandemic, so say that wasn't even a factor, how likely would they have been to attend this year's convention? So 3/4 of the participants said somewhat or very likely that they would have. So this was mostly people who wanting to attend and wanting to come to the event. There's a good number of folks that are almost a third that said they wouldn't be likely to attend even if there wasn't a pandemic. So that's just for us to consider. As of today, if the event were offered in person in September, how likely would you be to attend? And so you see the breakdown there. I lumped together the definitely would nots and the not likelies, and that totals of 61%. And then the somewhat very indefinitely closer to 40%, or right there at 39. So you see that that's where we are today on February 20th, or essentially a week ago when this survey was tabulated. Now I will mention too, if you take out the folks that were not likely to attend, even if there wasn't a pandemic, then that number in the likely 3 categories pops over 50% by a little bit. So just keep that in mind, that these numbers do also include those already who weren't going to go attend or weren't likely to attend anyway. So that's for us to look at and consider as we make our decision today. This I thought was interesting. So we asked when would they generally make the decision? And about 76% would make the decision June or later. So up to 3 months to a month before the event. So only 20 of the respondents said that they would be making that decision today or making that decision in March. So I thought that was interesting for what it's worth. This was also interesting and something we're gonna have to keep in mind for sure. Travel restrictions placed on our journalist members, our student members, those that, you know, are basically allowed or not allowed to attend professional development activities. We found that a good number might have those restrictions and might not be able to attend based on that. Now, that's as of today. So we're not sure, of course, how that will change. While the majority was no and not sure, it's still a good number that said that that could be a factor. And then what COVID-related factors would give you the most confidence in traveling to a conference? I think this is something we should definitely keep in mind and think about. And you know, some things, obviously, well, all these things really don't have much control over other than the one that says about ensuring that our event has strong social distancing and virus mitigation practices, which we can certainly talk more about as you want, but I feel very confident from visiting our hotel, potential hotel, that we'd be able to make that happen. But for what it's worth, these are some of the key factors. The biggest one being that people wanting to receive the vaccine themselves. So something that we ought to monitor as the weeks go and months come about. So that was the survey results. And like I said, we'll get through this and then open to any questions. I can reshare any of this if that's helpful. Some financial considerations to consider. So as I said, our cancellation fee at this stage could be as much as $146,000. That's what the contract states would be the fee. Our current organizational reserves stand at about $325,000. Our reserves, just for the board's awareness, you know, it's not a pretty picture, but it's declined 65% since July 2017. So we've had to dip into our reserves quite a bit, and that's for many reasons. Now, the better news is that our proper reserves, we might have let our reserves get almost too high. I mean, $1 million in reserves, I mean, we probably should have been spending some of that money, frankly, but proper reserves for SPJ for 3 months of operating would be closer to about $500,000. So we're not too far from that. But note that if we were to say that we're willing to pay that penalty, then we're almost taking our current reserves and in half, cutting it in half. If we did move to all virtual, there's a good chance, a likelihood we would save quite a bit of money on expenses that you would pay for in an in-person event. Things like audiovisual, the exhibit hall having the banners and the pipes and the drapes and signs and things like that, internet expenses on site, as well as meal expenses, so on and so forth. Our analysis, and Katie can talk to this more as if you want her to, is those expenses would not reach up to the cancellation fee. So there, you know, even if you were to put all that together, the cancellation fee would still be higher than the savings you would have on those convention expenses. We also have some analysis we can get into in a little bit too about if we reduce the event down, you know, obviously we also save on that as well without having to incur that penalty. So there's lots of ways you can work with those convention expenses still in our favor, even if the event happens in person and is just smaller. So we still obviously there's things that we don't have answers for today yet, and it's something that we'll be waiting on this conversation to sort of get more sense of. And so this would be, if we choose to go forward today, that we want to study the issue even further and wait and see what happens down the road into April or sooner. We would be able to put this more together. So what would be the right price point for a hybrid? So if you're in person, if you're watching it virtually, are there differences in price point? What would those be? Same for exhibitors. What do our sponsorship packages look like in that kind of a scenario? What are some of the extra costs with a hybrid model? So you would save on audio visual if you weren't in person, but you might put those costs right into then the cost to stream or to broadcast and things of that nature if we're doing a virtual or a hybrid event. So, what extra costs might incur there. And then, the hotel has signaled willingness to work with us. So they want us to be there, of course. That's their business. That's what they are wanting to have happen. And so can we discuss with them things and concessions or ideas that would make it even a better situation than it is with the hotel currently, as far as what they're providing and so on and so forth. And then one final slide, this wasn't in the packet in advance, and I apologize for that, but I was responding to a request to sort of what does a hybrid conference even look like, so that we have that in our mind, so we kind of have a sense of that as we think this through. And just as a reminder, we've, on a staff level, and I believe from the board, your communication last month and so on and so forth, we're definitely doing this, if anything. I mean, if we're not doing it, there isn't an option to do just an all in-person event. So even if we do an in-person event, there will be a virtual component, because we want member safety to be paramount. So if people don't feel comfortable coming, we don't want to rob them of their convention experience. So we're going to do, in some sense, a hybrid or a virtual, no matter what. So what does that look like? Well, there's costs involved, so we'd have to consider that. We'd have to consider the scheduling and all that. But if it was, say, limitless and we could do whatever we wanted, we would broadcast all the super sessions. We'd broadcast the breakouts. We'd make available those on demand for people to see as well. The speakers, we could have some that are in person. We could have some that are beaming in from elsewhere, and both live and virtually, you'd be able to see those folks interacting and engaging with each other. The trade show or the exhibit hall would be both live and virtual. So there might be hours where they're focused on the folks that are there in person, and then hours where they're able to engage electronically or virtually with people watching from afar. The conference app would make virtual networking possible. So we'd try to do things that were, try to bridge all the folks together that are tuning in virtually or in person. Or we could also do things devoted to those who are, just tuning in virtually, or devoted to those just in person. Likely we'd have to have some balance of that. But the idea would be that, and technology is helping solve this. Other conferences have happened in this way. You can design a pretty good hybrid conference that allows a virtual participant to feel as though they're there and experiencing it as well. So we would seek to do that if we went to that model. So that's, I guess I'd call on, if there's Katie, if you want to add anything more to that at this point, or anyone else from the staff. Other than that, we can just kind of open it up for discussion and dialogue. Okay, hearing none, then I'll stop sharing at that point. And Matt, that was the overview, and I'm willing to share or able to share anything else that from those slides again, if we need to.
Thank you, John, for that kind of succinct and thorough safety first presentation. Let me first go to questions from the board, and I know that Raphael had his hand up, and so we can take board questions kind of one time through if need be, and then go to the public comment and then come back and discuss. So if you, Raphael, if you have questions for staff, please go ahead.
Sure, and I apologize. I was trying to articulate my question before you called on me, but it sounds to me like the cost of the technological costs of a virtual convention, an all virtual convention, and a hybrid convention are going to be the same, because you're still doing the same things. So that cost sounds to me to be relatively fixed. When you talked earlier about how if we cancel the in-person part, it's going to cost us this much money, but we'll be saving money on the other in-person expenses. You said that it doesn't completely offset, that the savings and the penalty. The penalty is going to be greater than the savings. My question is, how much greater? Do we have a number? Is it 5,000 or is it 100,000? How much are we saving if we don't go in person?
John, do you want me to jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I calculated off of what our traditional event expenses would be if we run the convention live, and we calculated that on a reduced attendance number, assuming that most conventions that are going live right now in 2021 are seeing about 50 to 60% of their traditional live attendance. And then the remainder of those attendees and more are attending virtually, so in a hybrid component. Based on that, we would have around approximately $105,000 in direct convention expenses in comparison to this current cancellation of $146,000. So a considerable difference to execute, knowing that we also would have the opportunity to sell more sponsorships by having the potential to sell virtual and in-person sponsorships, and then to have live and virtual attendees as well. So it's about $41,000 today, just based on those expenses. Raphael, I did want to touch on one thing. When it comes to hybrid versus virtual, our AV budget will go up a little bit. And that is because hybrid, just to be in all transparency, is the most expensive when it comes to just the technology side of things, because we are having to engage a live audience as well as a virtual audience. While we're waiting on proposals currently from 3 different AV vendors that would be able to provide us a robust solution that would be able to engage both of those audiences, but the cost wouldn't be exactly the same. So virtual can be just as expensive as hybrid if you do everything virtual, but traditionally hybrid is a little bit more expensive to be able to engage both audiences.
Is it a little bit more expensive enough that we should be worried about that number, or?
No, at this time, I wouldn't have us be worried about it at all. And the reason is because we can adjust, right now I'm asking for the sky is limit proposal. So that is, like John stated, if we would take every super session 100% broadcasted, and we would take all of our breakouts where we're bringing in virtual attendees and have live or virtual speakers and live speakers, and we're broadcasting all of those and recording all of those for on-demand content. And then we'll take a look at those numbers, and then the idea would be that we would scale back where we need to in order to meet our needs, right? Like what we want to deploy virtually and what we want to get recorded versus what our budget demands. And so there'll be room to work on that so that we can make sure that we're not overspending essentially. So there's always flexibility in what we offer. Like I said, right now I'm asking for pie as the sky so that then we can scale back off of that number and really address what should be virtual versus what should just be live.
Thank you, Katie. Matt, I'm done.
Thanks, Raphael. Katie, a quick follow-up before I go to Beiling and then Lauren. You said you're waiting on 3 bids from AV firms. When do you expect those?
I should have those within next week or the week after. One of those is a local firm here, and I can dig into that if we need to, but one is a local firm here that I've worked with numerous times and has built out a robust studio here in Indianapolis. And then we're getting a bid from the in-house vendor, because those two generally make the most sense. That if we were to move completely to virtual, it would be nice to have the vendor here in Indianapolis where the headquarters staff is. Also working with the in-house vendor, they can help us save some costs potentially being in their property. And then one other vendor that is known for, they moved from a mobile app and a production company to a full AV hybrid model, and they own their app, which can also help us save a little bit of money. So 3 totally different options so that we can compare those costs. In production and ability, they'll be apples to apples, just different platforms and different types of companies.
Great, thanks for that explanation and for doing that work. Beiling.
I have 2 questions. Katie, my first question is about the bids that are out right now. I mean, the bids that you're getting from the vendors. Can you just clarify? I want to be sure I understand. Is it a bid for them to potentially do a hybrid conference or a virtual conference, or potentially both? Like, what are we asking them to bid on?
Sure, no problem. So right now, because as it stands, we're hybrid unless you all, the board, make the decision that you move to a fully virtual conference. The plan is that we will offer virtual no matter what, and we at this time. And so right now what they're bidding on is a fully hybrid solution. So we will be able to engage both audiences. I will say that the easiest thing to do is to start with a hybrid because it's the most robust. And then if we did need to make the decision eventually to go to a fully virtual, all of these companies would be fully capable of moving us fully virtual. And then the cost would be reduced, obviously, because we wouldn't have any on-site AV or on-site techs, right? So it would be less. So what we would be dealing with cost-wise and service level-wise would be the highest to start. And then if we needed to move to virtual, all of that would be reduced.
Great, thank you. That's so helpful. And then my second question is to, I guess, maybe John or whoever ran the data analysis. I'm a little, well, I won't say I'm concerned, but I was interested to see that a large portion of the respondents either haven't recently gone to conference or didn't plan to go to conference. And I'm wondering if it's possible to rerun those numbers with that group taken out, or somehow correlate the data in a way that we know the responses of the likely attendees as opposed to ones who weren't going to go anyway.
Yeah, I did do some of that analysis, and I can share that with you in a second here. Let me pull it up real quick. I won't pull up the screen, but I can just share with you how that affects the number. So what I did was I took out those who told us that they weren't likely to attend even if there wasn't a pandemic. And so when I did that, 52% of the respondents were then saying they would somewhat, very, or definitely attend, versus 48 who said they would not or definitely not. So that then it changed from 39% positive to 52% essentially, when you take those not likely people out completely.
And when those not likely people are taken out, I'm interested to know the distribution of the time frame within which they need to make a decision, like that to me is the most important one.
Okay, well, I can look at that while we're discussing here or get back to you on that, but
Thank you.
and then, yeah, so let me do that. I can't pull that up off the top of my head here, but.
Okay.
Lauren and then Claire.
Thanks, Matt. So my questions are for Jake. And it's about the 105,000 that Katie talked about for direct convention expenses, for the expenses and for food. Typically, when we have an in-person convention, there's a registration fee, and then for the president's banquet, people buy a ticket and pay for it separately. So how much of that money would be covered by those fees? Because when we go online, we just charged a nominal fee, so we really weren't covering any expenses. Because my understanding is the 146,000, that's just gone. And I'll talk later about the concerns I have about that related to the reserves to make a decision right now. But I just want to know, because to me, it's not an apples to apples 105 versus 146, because the 105 is not coming directly from us. And so I just want to know which portion is.
Lauren, you're 100% accurate on that. The 146 would literally just be SPJ paying the money, and then whatever we would offer virtually, you would still then have a new line of expenses, right? So you would still have AV, mostly audiovisual, and us to be able to stream and to offer like a great virtual conference. We have not set registration prices yet or released those, so it's hard at this moment for me to say exactly this would be offset by this amount of registration. But it goes without saying that if we charge a normal registration fee, say that normal registration fee is $275 per person, that we would be offsetting the food and beverage costs that we would be spending live. We'd be offsetting the audiovisual costs. If we have live exhibitors, they obviously cover a large portion or the majority of exhibit costs in their booth rental and their sponsorship through that. So right now, without having those exact prices set, it's hard to give you an exact number, but there would be a cost offset, and that is 100%, so that you would see revenue as opposed to a deficit in the finances.
Okay, so then if I could take that question to Jake, and to the last convention we have, you may not have the numbers, exact numbers in front of you, but from your experience in our previous in-person conventions, can you give us a ballpark general idea?
I don't know if I can give you a general idea on that, but in my view, the way I approach this is if we go and have a live convention or hybrid convention, if we don't have one, I'm sorry, we're paying out $146,000 for nothing, versus if we actually have the in-person event, we would be spending $105,000 or so, and anything, any registration that comes in over that would be gravy, because we would not be receiving that. So, like I said, in my view, we spend $146,000 and have no in-person revenue coming in, and like Katie said, additional sponsorships and things like that, or we pay out $105,000 and have a convention, and if somebody shows up at the convention, that goes to our bottom line and helps out, that we wouldn't see if we didn't have that happening. I do know a couple of other organizations went ahead and did the hybrid as well, because it was kind of a no-brainer decision with the huge penalties that you're incurring versus taking a chance and putting it on and hoping some attendance is good.
Okay, so I guess 2 follow-ups, one for each of you. So for Jake, is there any way for you to estimate, if we go with Katie's 50% normal attendance? So I guess for that would be what, 250, 300 people? How much we might make to offset part of the 105? And then I think this also goes to a question that Bailing had asked. If we stay right now with continuing the hybrid approach because we don't know what the future holds, and the majority of respondents said they needed 1 to 3 months, let's say we revisited this in June, how easy is it to pivot? And I guess this is for both of you, would the hotel be more likely to negotiate and not charge people $146,000 because we're trying, if we choose them as a future location? So we're not just saying we're not coming, but we need to move the date because our members are concerned, and we're not, and the information that the national public health officials have given us doesn't make us comfortable enough to do this in person.
So I'm happy to join in here with the conversation. So at this point, you're accurate. The hotel isn't willing to flex currently on the cancellation because the future is unknown at this point, with the vaccination coming out and being deployed, as well as other health and safety measures, and the fact that they're currently able to hold some meetings in New Orleans already at this point. They're just not looking to be flexible yet, but that is the key word, is yet. And so if we move closer to the date, yes, we are able to be flexible on our side if we start with the idea of planning a hybrid meeting. So to me, that's the key. We start with planning a hybrid meeting, and it's very easy for us to then work with our preferred vendor, the vendor we select for that production side of things, to completely shift our program virtually. So the organizations that we're looking at will be able to do an exhibit hall online. They'll be able to do a chat feature online. Members would be able to talk to each other and request that they see each other or swap emails online. So we can do networking, education, all of it right online if we need to. And so we won't, so the goal there is that we don't lose attendance and we don't lose sponsors or exhibitors if we needed to fully shift to virtual, so that we can also make the max amount of revenue for SPJ while meeting members' needs. So yes, we can 100% shift. At that point, if we get into June or July and things aren't better and they haven't lifted meeting restrictions, things don't look great, then the hotel is going to be much more willing to discuss with us either a reduced penalty to still hold a very small meeting, or no penalty at all. And we'll have a much better leg to stand on. And so my general recommendation, and what I'm seeing most of my groups do at this point, is they're holding firm, only because if you pull the plug now and you cancel, we have to write the check. And if things are still in a situation where you couldn't meet live in 3 months, they're not going to come back to you and be like, you know what, you couldn't have met anyway, so we'll refund that money. But if you hold tight, then they could be way more flexible if we aren't able to still meet. And then you're in a much better place. We were able to move to virtual only if needed, and you wouldn't have paid $146,000 to cancel a meeting that inevitably would have had to be moved to virtual anyway. So I hope that provides enough information.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Lauren. Let's go to Claire, and then if any other board member wants to speak after Claire, just let me know in the chat and we can go to you next, or raise a hand.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking for clarification after Lauren's question. I'm just wondering if the hybrid format cancels out the cancellation fee, or if there's some kind of a hotel requirement on attendance. Is there a number that we're supposed to host so that, you know, is there a requirement on the hotel's end for that? And I'm just looking for more details about the as much as 146,000. I guess that's where the variables are. Maybe John or Katie could comment on that.
Sure. As of right now, the number is $146,000. I've already spoken to the director of sales at the hotel and our national sales manager for Hyatt. And as of today, that is the fee. So when we say as much as, I think that is the conversation of, if you delay the decision to go fully virtual until April or another board meeting, then the hotel at that point might be much more willing to work with us and bring that fee down. So right now, that's no guarantees. They will not quote us on a number or provide that to us at this point, but there is a chance of that if things are still sitting in the same situation. When it comes to a guaranteed number of attendees at the hotel, right now we have what is called a room block, and we've guaranteed that room block at a certain number of rooms per night. That room block, we're supposed to pick up 80% of that room block before we fall into penalty. However, I've already spoken to the hotel, and this is what they would rather do with groups, is be flexible on your room block and any other spend that is promised to the hotel than for us to cancel the live portion. Basically, at the end of the day, they would rather us bring 100 people on site and host a hybrid meeting than to cancel that meeting altogether, because we're not going to get 500 people on site. And so they have already stated that they will be flexible with our terms, and that as we get closer and we're chugging forward and we have a better idea as to what that live in-person number looks like, then we can have conversations as we go about the reductions that we need in order to make this feasible for SPJ.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie and Claire. Any other, I see Rebecca's hand up.
Yes, thank you. Katie, I have a few questions for you, please. The hybrid. What 3 organizations have had successful hybrid conferences? I don't want the hotel's point of view because they have to make money. What 3 organizations, even 2, have had successful hybrid conferences during this pandemic, and what do they have to say about it?
Well, most of my groups have hybrid planned starting in May. So I haven't had personally a group that has held a fully hybrid in the pandemic situation. Now, I've had plenty of groups historically that were already in this world of hybrid anyway, so already offering that, and those have been successful. So those would be in different industries, but they have been successful. So if you want me to specifically reach out to groups at this point, I'm happy to do that, but I don't have data today on groups where I've spoken to their meeting planners or their executives to provide you.
Yeah, I think that's very important data, not from the past, from the pandemic. Because if we're talking about a hybrid and we're really selling it, as it appears to be, then we need to know, as a journalist, I'd want to know, and that's the first question. I'd like to know the organizations because I'd like to talk to them, what worked and what didn't, what would they do differently. Thank you for that information. If you can provide any organizations, I can also reach out, but I will be looking into, I'm going to put out a tweet and say, hey, anybody did a hybrid? I'd like to know, because I think that's important. But it's interesting to know that, there haven't been no hybrids, but we're planning a hybrid. I guess I'd hate to be the guinea pig of it, but if we have to be, then we have to be.
Well, I would like to add, I said there haven't been hybrids that I have specifically planned for my clients yet in the pandemic, but there have been, there's meetings that are happening like in Indianapolis, for instance. So
yeah, but I'm not saying meetings, I'm saying conventions, conferences. Mm-hmm. That's what that's the information I want to know, because this is what we're planning, a conference, and I want to see what hybrid out there has really been a success, because then it's another sales encourager for our members who are deciding, do I do hybrid or do I go to New Orleans or not? So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I can definitely gather those for you.
Please, I'd appreciate it. Also, I think it's very unprofessional that the hotel has not been flexible. And I understand it's a pandemic, but what I see with other journalism organizations, that the hotels have worked with them. And I hope they realize that, during this time, we should all be flexible. But I understand they're a business, and so I wanted to put that on the record. Also, when we look at, let's talk about a hybrid. Let's say people go to New Orleans. Do we have liability insurance? Let's say somebody goes to the conference, gets sick, possibly as a freelancer, doesn't have money to pay, for health benefits, maybe dies. Do we have liability insurance to cover us in that area? Because I'm sure it could be more than $146,000. So do we have any kind of insurance, John, Katie, that would cover us from any legal liability?
I'll start and then Katie, you can add in. We can certainly consult with our legal team about that liability. But other groups are solving this with waivers and with obviously proper mitigation and techniques and such. I mean, right now someone could come to a meeting and then die of some disease they got there that's not COVID. And so it's one of those things where I think we have some reasonable protections. It's also noted New Orleans is actually one of the better cities in this, and Katie can talk more about that on the liability front.
And I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. But still, I think that the legal part should have been looped in early in this, because we're talking about a pandemic. Yeah, I mean, anybody could die of a heart attack or cancer or whatever, but we're in a pandemic right now. So it's important to know whether we can be sued. I think waivers, what does that mean, John? Explain that to me.
Well, medical liability waivers that most people fill out for almost any activity they do these days. We would have one for the convention as well that said that, because you don't know if somebody if they were in that circumstance, if they came with it or if they got it there. So we would want to protect ourselves by making sure that people acknowledge that through a waiver of some kind. But let me ask Katie to talk about what New Orleans has done in that regard, because I think that informs that same question.
So, but before Katie, you go into this area, let me finish this. So I keep thinking of Donald Trump when he had his, his little rallies, and he had people sign, apparently don't sue me if you get COVID. And, remember, I mean, we're an organization that if we start making people sign waivers, it's not going to look good for our organization. I'm just putting it out there. I'm thinking as a reporter right now, the reporter hat, not your president-elect, your reporter hat. I'm thinking, you're going to sign waivers? Also, people have privacy. I don't have any health issues, but if I had diabetes or a bad heart, it's none of your business. I'm not going to tell you, and I'm not going to sign a waiver. So I think that we are treading in really, difficult, a light situation in that area. Obviously, as a Latina, it's killing us, and it's killing African Americans. So that's a given. But I understand. I really think, John, that we really need to loop in our legal people, because, yes. I keep hearing it over and over. It's like carved in my forehead, $146,000. But I keep thinking, if someone gets sick and sues us, it could be more than that. And again, we are creating a very a safe, or implying we're going to have a very safe area. And no matter what New Orleans is planning, or Chicago, or whatever, in the end, it just takes one person to, create a super spread. I mean, I know people that have admitted to me that are members, they're not going to get the vaccine. They're not going to get it. And we don't have the right to ask them if they have it. So I think there's a lot to think about. I mean, I think, again, going back to the hybrid, we need to see what organizations have really been successful. Really, let's look at that. Because virtual, we're going to be safe at home, and maybe we will save money, and maybe we won't be sued. But I think that's very, very important to look into that. And again, it's something that worries me. I've said it before. I would love to get together and hug on everybody, but I live with a 93-year-old elderly man. I'd hate to bring something home because I had such a good time in New Orleans. Katie, would you like to add anything? Would you like to share anything with me?
Sure, I'd love to step in here for you. So the waiver, just to touch, because I understand your concern when we talk about waivers, we're not going to ask anyone to tell us what pre-existing conditions they may have or anything along those lines. When we talk about a waiver there, I have example waivers, which one I've already sent over to SPJ, which will be built into the registration process essentially, which is that they are saying that if they have come in contact, kind of like the waivers you'd fill out if your child is going to school, for instance, right now, have you come in contact with anyone? Do you have the symptoms? You know, those types of things. Have you been diagnosed or tested positive for the virus? And you have to basically say, I understand this, I have not, and that I will, if I do and that changes, I will contact SPJ, essentially along those lines. So we're not asking them to, other than sharing, yes, I've tested positive or no, I haven't. That would be the most detailed medical information we would be gathering from them, but that they are saying, I will follow SPJ's rules, that if, you know, right now we're saying mask will be required, temperature checks, we will be, you know, keeping other people out of our meeting space. Essentially, we'll be socially distancing, providing hand sanitizer stations, et cetera, and that you will follow those guidelines, and that if you have any concerns, you will not come to our event, and that you're saying that you will not do that and come and spread it. And that also that SPJ is not liable, that you're participating willingly in this conference and that they will not be held liable. So that is generally what most event organizers are doing at this point, is they're putting that into the registration process so that before you click yes that you're coming and pay your money, you are already aware that you're basically releasing SPJ from liability. In New Orleans, I shared a link from New Orleans in the chat. They're one of the few cities in the United States that is actually put into their government system, essentially like a House bill that protects organizers like SPJ from being sued, essentially. So I shared that, and you are welcome to read through it. It's a bill, but they've provided that as something, as well as it's really hard for people to, just like if they got the flu or chickenpox or anything else, like John said at our event, it's really hard for them to nail down where they got it. So they might try to sue us, but likely that's not going to happen. I also will say that from personal experience, I went to 2 events this fall, one in November and one in December. Both of them were, one was over 1,000 attendees and one was 900 live attendees. Both of those were actually hybrid. As an attendee, I participated, and neither one of those had issues. So people masked up, we did temperature checks every day, they did, you know, basic contact tracing, and we were able to host those meetings in the height of the virus, right? Like during flu season and when things were really bad. And so those were successful. And as an attendee, I felt safe to be at those meetings and to attend in person. And they were taking, you know, restrictions. So I think it is definitely care and concern is top priority for all of us and of the attendees. And, you know, we're just asking people to do what's most comfortable for them. And so the hybrid allows them to do that. So if for yourself, it just doesn't make sense for you to do that because of your loved ones or yourself, then with the hybrid model, you can still attend and enjoy SPJ's conference from the safety of your home or your office, wherever you're more comfortable. And if you are okay to travel and you have gotten the vaccine and you feel confident, then you can also attend in person. So it gives us the ability to meet members or attendees where they're at on their comfort level.
I just think that any waiver that we have to sign, again, we're a journalism organization, and you know, thank God you were safe at those conferences that you went to. But again, many of us are reporting on this. Wear a mask, less travel, this and that. And I definitely don't want to look like a bunch of hypocrites. And so, you know, and I totally understand the hybrid model. Again, I don't know who has been successful. That's a real holdup for me. Who's been successful? But, you know, and there may be people that will say that, you know, they have never had COVID. Again, we're asking personal questions, you know, whether they have had COVID or not. I'm really concerned about even a hybrid. But, you know, again, John, I hope you check with our lawyer and about, yeah. And I will say this as someone who's covered the CDC and COVID trackers, Katie, they will find where it all started. They will, you may think they can't, but they can. They can track down who was where, when, from the airplanes to, you know, showing up at a conference. They will find out. I mean, that's what makes these CDC people so good. There's always a way. And I think that—
Join the meeting.
And I also think that, you know, there's going to be several lawsuits, you know, in the future concerning the pandemic. But anyway, that's me for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Let's go to Jerry, and then if other board members have questions to them. I see Bailing has their hand up again, but let's go to first timers first. Jerry.
Hi, thank you. This may have been covered, but I'm not quite sure. The precautions, if we were to have an in-person hybrid convention, would the hotel pick up the cost of the precautions like masks and sanitary stations, or is that something written into the budget that we would pick up?
If I can touch on this, the hotel has already installed hand sanitizer, like freestanding automated stations all over the hotel. So those are already out and about in the space. I will also say that currently, this is a little bit different, but currently there is no other group booked in-house while we're there. So I think that that's something good to note, and we're condensed to 2 floors. So it should be much easier for us to watch our footprint essentially and keep people in our group together, but not commingling with others as much. And when it comes to masks or providing thermometers in order for us to do temporal scans of people, that would be something that SPJ would need to cover themselves. I think it should be minimal in all reality. We'll provide, we'll only need probably a handful, say 10 thermometers. They're not that expensive. And then we would ask people obviously to bring their own masks, but if not, we would provide the medical grade, disposable masks as people needed. And once again, a nominal cost. I think we're talking under $150, honestly, for us to be able to make sure that we have plenty of supplies in order to supply anyone that either doesn't feel comfortable with what they've brought themselves or just doesn't bring anything. It'd be pretty hard for them not to have anything, as you can't get on an airplane or into an airport without a mask at this point. You can't walk in the front door of the hotel at our Hyatt without a mask on at this point, and they have them to provide to attendees or guests that walk into the hotel as well. Basically, you can only be in your hotel room at our Hyatt currently unmasked in order to be in their property. So
The other question I have, I'm just concerned about the optics of this, because also I'm obsessed with the COVID because we all have to be. I noticed that it goes up around holidays. So we have Memorial Day coming up, we have the 4th of July, and then our convention is basically Labor Day weekend. And I'm just concerned about people traveling and gathering with families and that sort of thing. And I just worry that, with an in-person hybrid situation, someone could potentially think that they're safe and then take it back to their families and then hold us liable. I'm just a little concerned about that. Has there been any discussion, and maybe this is going above beyond, with the local health department or the county health department from the hotel's perspective about projections on, what is their forecast looking like for the pandemic?
The local New Orleans forecast, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't have that information in front of me today as far as where I know that they are, like many cities, they're progressing through a series of touch points or milestones to get to new levels and that. And I did, by the way, find that New Orleans was very cognizant of managing through this virus. I think when I was going there to site visit, everyone was like, "Oh, I bet they're still partying on the streets in New Orleans." No, they weren't. No, they're very cautious. They're very careful. And so they are taking it from a governmental standpoint in a very systemic way. But, it's one of those things where we're not sure where we'll be. Things have changed since we last gathered together in January. So, what's it going to be like in April, much less than June, July, September. So it's hard to really know what that situation will be like.
Thank you. And thanks to board members for keeping your questions concise, and to the audience for waiting till we get to them. Any other board members who haven't spoken? I see Bailing and Claire have their hands up again. Yvette Davila Richards.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to touch base on what was just mentioned in regards to making sure we have PPE. How do you call that again? PPD? Well, the materials like the masks and any other gloves on hand. I know you mentioned that people should have them on, which that's a given, they should. But as it happens, sometimes they may be coming off, or the person chooses to just get a new one. So I really feel if we're having this conference in person, we should have, it should be a no-brainer to have extra masks and or gloves besides the designated hand sanitizers that the hotel is bringing and has set up for us to have them as well, just to keep our bases covered, because like it's been mentioned here by Rebecca and others, and I hope you can hear me because I'm wearing my mask since I'm here at work. We do have to keep that on the back of our heads that we can be sued if someone does catch it. As much as we're trying to be safe and adhere to the guidelines and the social distancing, there are people who are asymptomatic who they give it off, but they're not suffering from any of the symptoms, and that's something that we have to be sure we pay attention to, because we could bring them back home, as has been mentioned here. So we're just looking out for the interests of the organization. I know we want to see each other and we want to have this conference in person. I know I'm leaning towards the virtual, but if we can have, either or to make sure that we make our members happy if someone attend as well. But we need to make sure we have insurance for that, because even though there may be waivers that are giving, there's always a loophole, and there's always someone who's going to find that loophole. So I just want to make sure that we're prepared. And that was it.
Thanks, Yvette. And why don't we go, and remember, this is for questions from the board. We have plenty of time to talk after the audience weighs in. Yvette Walker, please.
Hi. We're talking about PPE. There's certain levels of PPE. And I think we probably need to check with the CDC to see what they're recommending now. For example, they're not recommending gloves right now, but at one point they were recommending eye coverings if you are in an area where you're close to people. And that is a little bit more of an expense. So I think we'd probably need to think about the different levels of PPE that we could provide and put that into the budget. But of course, there are people who, someone mentioned earlier, that are not going to get the vaccine. There are people who will not wear PPE. And I know we can require it, but there may be members who simply don't want to wear it. And then do we kick them out? I mean, that's kind of, that would be an unfortunate thing to have to do, but I believe we would need to do it, but that might set a bad tone. So I just think we need to think through those things. I think these questions are really, really good. And I'll be quiet so we can get to the members as soon as possible.
Yeah, but I agree that we will follow any CDC guidelines, of course, and that we'll be following that. If we move forward with the live participation, then if they were to change and say gloves would be a recommendation, I don't think that they would, but if they did, then we would have those on hand and that we would budget to have plenty of PPE. And then I have security budgeted as well, and they, in agreeing that they're coming to our conference, they're agreeing that they're going to follow the instruction from the hotel and from the event organizers, and the hotel won't allow it, much less us allowing it. So if they decide not to wear their PPE properly, then I believe at that point they would have to be asked to leave or to follow the protocol. And it wouldn't just be us, it would be the hotel, in fact, as well. So because for them entering the Hyatt, they're already agreeing by booking a room at the Hyatt that they'll follow all of the Hyatt's protocols, and not just by attending our event. So we've got a little bit of help there when it comes to the Hyatt requiring it, as well as our event requiring it.
Yeah, I personally don't have any problem with enforcing the rules and kicking people out if they don't wear a mask. That's what we should do as a membership organization. Why don't we go to Beiling, and then Claire, please keep your questions brief, and then we'll go to the audience.
Yeah, I just want to mention that so far we've talked about this from the perspective of financial, legal, and health. And I'm wondering if we could also consider this from another perspective, and that's the perspective of equity. And here's why. So Katie mentioned, and rightfully so, that if we have a hybrid conference, it's all options are on the table and people can do what they're comfortable with. And I'm just wondering if we're considering too the extent to which a hybrid conference exacerbates existing inequity, because what people are comfortable with has a lot to do with their personal situation in terms of the privileges they have or the privileges that they don't have, right? So for example, I'm privileged to have employer paid healthcare. And so from that standpoint, I might be comfortable traveling to New Orleans because if I get sick, I can get taken care of. But on the other hand, I might not be comfortable traveling to New Orleans because of the attacks on Asian Americans in response to the virus, right? So it's not so much a question, although I do want John to have the chance to answer my earlier question, but just a broad thought for us to question ourselves as board members if we could also consider the equity dimensions of this decision. Thanks.
By the earlier question, do you mean the survey data? So let me address that. So if you take out those who weren't going to attend likely anyway, if there wasn't a pandemic, and then you re-looked at the question of when would you make the decision to attend, still we have 60% that would make that decision up to 3 months or up to a month before the event. And the number that grows is not sure. That grows to a 30% mark with that. So, but the up to 6 months before, or about this time frame, is still 6% of the respondents. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Claire?
A quick logistics question. If I'm at the beautiful Hyatt Regency, and it is a magnificent hotel, I looked it up and researched it, and I choose to go to a super session, who regulates how many people are in the session? Is that the hotel's responsibility? Or, I teach at a college, and in New York City here, we have 25% capacity in restaurants now. And in the dining hall at our college, no chairs are allowed to be moved because they're all spaced out for safety. So how does that work at a conference where people are just so likely to pull up a chair and, oh, Claire, I'm so glad to see you. How does that work? Katie, you said you've been to 2 events. Maybe you could shed some light on that. I just can't envision everybody just staying put, spaced out in a place, in an opportunity where you want to go, talk to people and sit with people. How does that work? And will there be limits on numbers of people in our super sessions? Can only 25% of the room be filled? How does that work? If that's still enforced by the September.
Mm-hmm. So great question, Claire. We are extremely fortunate at the Hyatt, to be quite honest, that we have a lot of space. We have 2 whole floors of meeting space there, which does allow us, with the anticipated reduction in live attendance, which, like I said, most groups are seeing between 50 and 60% that are doing hybrid options right now of live attendance of their normal numbers, which would put us at like that 250 mark. Our ballroom in a theater capacity, I'd have to pull it up, can hold over 1,000 people. So hands down, our meeting space is well equipped in just size to be able to handle our reduced numbers spaced appropriately. We were able to see our general session set in the current standard, which would have held, I think they had it set for 500, and it was still fully socially distanced. 4 people at a round, at an 8-foot round is what's considered allowable right now. So it's kind of everyone at 12, 3, 6, and 9, essentially. We can do less than that because we're fortunate, once again, to have a lot of space. When it comes to policing that, that will need to be on us and our security team. We can ask for the hotel's support on that, but the basics are there'll be no standing in the back of the room, essentially. Like, you need to commit to a space, commit to a chair, obviously not moving chairs around. And I will tell you that at the 2 conferences I went to this last fall, it wasn't an issue. People understood that to be there was a privilege, to be quite honest, because so few of us are meeting people, and we're excited to be there. But you didn't see people shaking hands. I didn't see people hugging each other. I didn't see people moving chairs. And I was taking pictures, and I was all eyes on board because obviously this is my industry. And people generally behaved, which shocked me. People pulled their masks down to eat, but the eating was to be seated. There was no roaming around with food type of options where people were just roaming around with their masks off eating. And so people generally were doing pretty well. I did see some people wear their masks inappropriately occasionally, like below their nose. And staff at the hotel and security and of those conferences then gently reminded them to pull them up or they would have to leave the space. But so to answer your question, we have plenty of space to provide adequate social distancing, more than enough social distancing, and people will need to be in chairs. And I am fully comfortable to roam those spaces and be one of the people that polices that, to just gently remind people that they need to sit and wear their PPE. But we do have the space and the adequate to adequately social distance and to protect people that way.
Thanks, Katie. I'd like to go to audience. I see Rebecca with a hand. Rebecca, why don't you end the board?
Yeah, real quick.
Questions, please. Not commentary, but questions. Thanks.
Okay. I'll make my comments afterwards.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping we do. Thank you. So seeing that, why don't we go to public conversation? And Sal, is your question still on the floor? If your question's been answered, just say.
It's a question and not really a comment. I sent a letter. Hi, everybody. My name is Sal Morales, and I am a freelance journalist based in Miami, Florida. Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this meeting today. I sent a letter to the association, and I got an automatic response from Jennifer Royer. So this is why I decided to join and jump in and ask you this question. I want to say this on the record, and this is something that I wrote in the letter, that as far as myself, I would not attend a conference with hundreds of people who may or may not be vaccinated by September. I don't feel safe about going to New Orleans. I see and I read every single newspaper that comes out of New Orleans, and I respectfully disagree with the fact that New Orleans is safer than Miami. And that I would like to ask respectfully if you would consider having it virtually like other journalism associations have had it in the past, such as NAHJ and NABJ. They had it last year. Another question that I have is this: if you have a hybrid for a convention, how do you envision having, the job fair? You know, that is the reason why I go to these conventions, so I can get a job, whether it's a freelance job or a permanent job. I mean, these are questions that are actually in the minds of not only myself, but also other members that are not on this call right now. So my question to you is this: why, besides the $146,000 that you guys are simply going to lose if you guys go virtually, is there another pertinent reason besides money that would put this conference at risk of everybody else's health?
Thanks for your question, Sal. I think the board's going to ultimately decide today. It's the next steps. But I will say, as we saw from the survey results, 50+% of the people said that they would like the option of going in person. So that answers that question. But I think you had a specific question about the job fair, which I'd love to hear John's answer on. I think that's a really good question, and I appreciate you asking it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sal. And I'll just add to what Matt said and say that, you know, we may go all virtual for sure. So the point is, do we do that today and then forfeit 146,000 automatically, or do we give it more time to improve our negotiating standpoint and see how conditions change? So for what it's worth, the job fair could be handled in a variety of different ways, but the hybrid, we will have some sort of an app or a platform, mobile friendly or on a computer, that people can engage with the conference. And on that app or platform, like we're doing today on Zoom, there can be time set aside for job seekers and job providers to engage with each other virtually, as well as those who are in person to do it there as well. Same with our other exhibitors. Say you're shopping for, you know, new broadcasting equipment, and we typically would have an exhibitor there. They'll have it set up there at New Orleans, but then also we'll have time where they turn on their computer and they're open to Zoom conversations with those who are attending virtually. So I think because of the good news about Zoom and the way it's, you know, kind of become very commonplace for everybody, is we can do a lot of things like this in addition to having the in-person component.
Thank you, Sal and John. Colin, you're next on my list.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Yeah, so I'm just thinking, what if we did require vaccination to attend? By then, September, our administration says that by July, everyone will have access to the vaccine. So what if that is a way to ensure, I mean, so also keep in mind that it's only 95% effective, so you would still need PPE. But maybe that's a way to ensure, give people some semblance of safety to come in person. And maybe that would help with the revenue side. Those are my comments. I mean, not really a question, I guess.
John, do you want
to? It was an idea. I don't know that we have an answer for that as far as, would it require people to have a vaccine to attend or not? I mean, I don't know that we would decide that today, but it's an intriguing thought.
Thanks. Next on my list is Daniela and then Hazel.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Loud and clear.
So my name's Daniela. I'm a reporter in Abilene, Texas. This is my very first job. And I have a couple of comments that I wanted to add. So I work for Sinclair. And one of the things that we're told, we get an email every couple of months saying, when our return to office date is, because right now we're working from home and sometimes, from the station, but every email that we get our return to office pushed back. One of the things in that email that we get every single time is we're told not to go to group conferences. So if, for example, if this conference were to happen right now, my boss would not let me go, even if I would want to go. The second thing is, so I'm actually vaccinated right now. I'll be fully vaccinated in March. And according to the CDC right now, they're saying that, for the first 3 months, if you're exposed, you don't have to quarantine if you have the vaccine. Well, after that you do. And if I were to go in September and I were to be exposed, I'd have to quarantine, which is something that I'd really not like to do. And then also talking about the hybrid conference, like I get, wanting to be in person, but for somebody who's early in their career, who, doesn't make a lot of money, for me personally, as an early career journalist, I would do the online part. It just makes more sense to me than going to, I get the, the in-person networking and all that stuff, but for somebody who's early in their career, who doesn't make a lot of money, I would just do the online conference and get what I can out of that. So that's all I have to share.
Thank you, Daniela.
If I can just make one quick comment, Matt, that one of the benefits of this discussion and all this happening is that we may now forever have conferences that have a virtual component, right? Because we're learning how to do this. So that will help with access to the event for those that may not be able to attend.
Thank you. And thank you for those comments, Daniela. I appreciate them. Hazel Becker.
I have a real question. And it is, have we given thought to using something other than Zoom that is a really robust conference technology, since I believe I've heard people say we'll probably be virtual into the future. And if so, can you just reassure, and if or not, can you please reassure me that we are going to do something about accessibility for people who can't hear so that they can partake of the conference? I know people, freelancers, who did not come last year because there's no closed captioning. And we have the problem also with meetings. This meeting should have closed captioning. So what's being done to look for better ways to connect online?
John, you want to handle that? Hey, Hazel, that's on our radar for the conference for sure. And I was on a call a couple of weeks ago, that actually a Zoom call that had closed captioning. So I think it's something we can definitely do for convention. And the idea you bring up about meetings is a good one as well. John?
I'll actually let Katie address the technology question. So go ahead, Katie.
All right, great, thank you. Yes, so what we're looking at this year in terms of technology and vendors is not just a regular old Zoom meeting. So it will be more robust. It will come with mobile capabilities as well as your laptop or a tablet with any of the 3 providers that we are currently vetting. We'd be able to, like John mentioned, there'd be opportunities for attendees to network via chat or via video potentially. Exhibit hall could be completely virtual. And the reason it being that if we were to move from hybrid, the decision be made by the board, to a virtual event, we want it to be more than just a bunch of sessions that are Zoom meetings. So that is the expectation of most attendees at this point after being so virtual for so long. And so we're trying to answer that call by only vetting technology vendors that can handle a more robust solution. When it comes to accessibility, I hear your cry for that. I worked previously with an organization for 5 years that was a conference specifically for an organization with people with disabilities. And I always work with our AV provider to build in the accessibility needs that are potentially open on the table. And as we build registration this year, that's something that I would like to help support, is that we ask more diligent questions so that we know what our attendees that would be coming on site actually need, because that's what we need. We need that information first so that we know what we will need with our technology vendor and our host facility in order to answer our members' needs on site.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for that question, Hazel. I'll talk to John about making sure our meetings are closed captioned too. I really appreciate that point. Hillary.
Hi, thanks. So just two questions. One is pinging a little bit off of Hazel's question about the conference platform. Is one of the features from the virtual conference last September that I think was kind of lacking in the chat rooms is the ability to have threaded conversations. So it was really like just everybody talking about everything all in one thread, and there wasn't an ability to thread conversations the way that you do, for example, in Facebook. And so I think that made it a little bit chaotic, and it would be helpful to have threaded conversations in the conference platform's chat room. So I'm wondering if that is a feature that's on your list. And then my second question, and I don't expect y'all to have an answer to this right now, but I just am wondering if it's on your radar, is for conference, for example, for session organizers, like the freelance community proposed, I think 11 sessions. And depending on the state of the virus and various, factors that we've all been discussing, the people who submitted those session proposals as the organizers, they may or may not attend in person if there is a hybrid conference. And so my question is, will there be like a training program to assist and facilitate the virtual organizers? So not just the conferees, right? But like, how will the organizers be able to do their job to pull the session off from home?
John,
I think we can commit to that, John or Katie.
Yeah, we can certainly commit to that training activity, like to help people get prepared to be able to host it, virtually if need be. That's clearly something we ought to do. Thank you, Hillary. We'll definitely be geared up to do that. So about the platforms, I believe we reviewed do have the opportunity for threaded conversations, at least the one I sat in on, and I know that we've got a couple more bids coming in potentially, but we'll look to make sure that that's an option. That is probably the easiest solution that most of these platforms provide for that engagement between attendees virtually versus in person, is being able to chat with each other through the app and things of that nature. So we'll make sure it has that capability.
Yeah. And just to touch on the speakers, all the platforms we're looking at have the capability of us having, like John mentioned earlier, presenters in person, presenters virtually in the same session, where our virtual audience and our live audience can see that. And we'll have technicians, training runs, all of that pre-launch. So that would all be done. We also have the capability of recording sessions in advance if that's easier, and then just doing a live Q&A. So there's a lot of flexibility with the providers that we're talking to that have great platforms.
That's perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, Hillary, for those questions. Jennifer Ellis, you're next.
I had just mentioned in the chat that like based on the survey, it seemed like there were 318 respondents. If 39% said they were somewhat likely or better to attend, that's like 129 people, 24 people. So that's more like the size of a regional conference. So what are we planning on right now as how many people would be attending, and like what kind of room block have we already reserved? Because when you guys are saying like 1,000 people conference, I don't think that that's what we're planning. If it's more like 150 people, I think that's something different than what other people are talking about.
So average attendance would be 500 to 600 approximately. And so most organizations are seeing 50 to 60% of their typical live attendance as they're going live during pandemic right now. So we're talking more in the neighborhood of 250 to 300 people. Keep in mind, a lot of our members didn't take that survey. So some of them may have not have seen it or acknowledged it or just don't take surveys. So talking about 250 to 300. Right now, our room block is higher. The committed room block to that hotel is higher than that number. However, the hotel has already said that because all their groups across the country are seeing this slightly lower attendance, that they are willing to be flexible if we are to move forward with the live component on what that room block commitment looks like. That's an ongoing conversation that we'll have with the hotel. That's not something they can give us a definite answer on, and we probably wouldn't want them to, honestly, today, because we haven't launched registration. We don't know what those numbers look like, but that they'll work with us as we move towards that date, that live event date, to negotiate that room block to something that makes more sense for SPJ and the attendance that we will actualize on site.
Thank you. Jennifer, that answer your question? You're good? Okay. Bob and then Erwin.
Thanks, Matt. Hazel and I are privileged in a lot of ways, but the one that's most relevant is that we've had our vaccinations. And barring finding a situation where the variants are causing vaccinated people to get sick, very sick, we probably would go to New Orleans. And so I think everybody makes choices. We make choices whether to be vaccinated. We make choices whether to go to conferences. That happens in real life. And I think that as long as we are prepared to provide a conference that everybody can attend, whether they go to New Orleans or not, then if we can cover our costs, we should do that. Because this could go on for years, or if the current hospitalization and death rates continue to decline, we could be ready for a lot of people to come to New Orleans in September. It's changing. The vaccination rate's changing. The transmission of this disease is changing. I think that we should plan at this point to have a hybrid convention, and everybody will make the choices they need to make so that they can feel comfortable and get the most benefit out of this conference. And SPJ will serve its members as those people want to be served. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Erwin. You're muted, Erwin.
There we go. Yeah, I agree with Bob about choices. You know, I mean, if there is one thing and one thing only that would give me pause about all of this, it would be the potential legal liability, but I think that's minimal. And in the end, SPJ as an organization always faces potential legal liability, but it can't sometimes stop you as a board from making the decisions you need to make as long as they're reasonable. And if I can, I'm just going to speak directly to the point that's facing you as a board today. You know, the decision you have to make today is whether or not to approve a virtual only conference today, or to wait another 6 weeks or so until April to see how the situation has changed and make your decision then at a time when the hotel might be more flexible in turn if you decide to cancel an in-person meeting. I mean, to me, the decision you have to make today is kind of a no-brainer, since there is a hefty penalty for deciding to move to a virtual conference. there's no compelling reason to move to a virtual conference today when that option is still available to you in April. And I think there's also one other thing to consider that nobody has mentioned. You know, somebody asked what's the benefit to SPJ of doing this? I don't think you can completely discount the benefit of assembling at least those members, many of whom are going to be long-term SPJ stalwarts, from gathering in person. It's the kind of activity that keeps people engaged in the organization. And to lose our in-person convention 2 years in a row, it is probably not good for the organization unless it absolutely had to do that. And right now, given where we're headed by September, we probably can go ahead. But today, at least, you don't have to make that decision, and I would urge you to wait and see where we are in about 6 weeks or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Erwin. Abby, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I know I'm kind of new to the organization, but I've been a member of NABJ for a few years, and having been a participant in many of their digital platforms and their virtual offerings for class and both convention. I'm a member of our diversity and inclusion committee, so I'm going to speak from a place where I speak for other people of color, other journalists of color, and I've heard several people speak specifically about violence with the Asian American community. We want to talk about the fact that a lot of journalists, a lot of Black Americans in general are disproportionately affected. They're not getting vaccines. They're afraid of the government for various reasons. I know I speak for myself when I say I don't feel comfortable with coming to an in-person convention and knowing that there are viable platforms that would be available to us to have a successful convention. My question would be, I know I asked if there were any consulting between NABJ and SPJ. Matt and I know in our meeting, I spoke with you in Arkansas a few months ago, we talked about a few things. But I know that there are many of us who are members of both organizations. Are there any committees open to the general body that could speak out or work on solutions should we have to go virtual? But again, I really think we're speaking from a place, some of us are privileged. Others, especially I heard someone that said that they were in their first news job, some of the networks saying that, hey, you can't go, we don't want you to be in danger. So you have to look at all those things and just, again, making sure that we're not speaking just for, a group of people, but for all of us. And I'm not in favor of in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. And thanks for your recent membership with SPJ and for being a part of multiple organizations. We will, as I said in the chat, we will be in communication with those other organizations moving forward. I think they have, I think we all have kind of advice and help that we can give to each other. John, anything you want to add on to Abby's points?
You know, unmuted here. Other than I would add that, I stay in communication with executive directors of these other organizations. I know that some other organizations who had earlier meetings have gone all virtual. We all know we have a lot to learn from each other as we go, along this route. But, one thing, it's not related necessarily to Abby's question, but just to keep in mind is that every meeting is different, every contract is different, every situation is different when it comes to these things. So just when you see another group decide to make that move, we don't know exactly the circumstances that caused that. So we should make this decision that's best for us and what our circumstances, contractually, so on and so forth. But yeah, I lean on those organizations a lot and could see us working together quite a bit more into the future with virtual events and planning.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, one of the cool things that came out of the pandemic is a couple of weeks ago, I saw that NABJ was having a virtual meeting and was offering it for free to sister organizations like ours and all the other affinity groups. So that is one positive in among a lot of negatives from this pandemic. Andy, you're next.
Thank you, Matt. I had 4 questions, but they're real quick. I think they're probably all for Katie. So I'll just go through them quickly. You did address the idea of a room block and that the hotels are willing to work with us on that. Is there also a food and beverage minimum requirement where we could be on the hook, and they're also willing to work for that with us on that. That's one. Two is, I was just curious, you have presented information that leans toward holding off and waiting on a decision. Is that actually your recommendation to the board as our consultant? And as a corollary to that, when do you think would be a good time to guess we could have a final decision? And then the last thing is, Lauren brought up the idea of what money would be coming in instead of just looking at what money we would lose. What I haven't heard is any kind of projections of what money would actually come in. Is there any way to look at possible revenue, possible sponsorships, a range of different models, or is it just totally impractical to even think about it because it's so murky? So those are my four. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. Yes, we do have a food and beverage minimum in our agreement. That is the only other financial obligation to the hotel we have outside of the room block. And they are willing to be flexible on that as well, understanding that if we have lower attendance in live participation, that we will not spend as much on food and beverage. So they are willing to be flexible on that as we move along. So that's number one. When it comes to my recommendation, as your consultant, what I am recommending to all of my groups at this point that are thinking about this decision as they're going along for fall or for winter groups, because you're not the only one, is that we hold tight. And that is because I do believe that if there is a real need to cancel the live participation due to safety, security, whatever it may be, whatever reason we're looking at addressing all of those concerns, that there will be more flexibility with our venue as we get closer to the date. And because we're already planning a hybrid event at this time, we will be able to, I'm going to use the P word, and I'm sorry, pivot to a fully virtual event in the future, and that won't be a problem, whereas our liabilities will be lower if that is seen as a need to move to that virtual format. So my suggestion personally would be to hold tight at this point and then to continue to revisit as we move along. So in April at the next board meeting to revisit, I know that that's already been thrown out, and at that time we will have more solid numbers when it comes to, we're working on what all of our sponsorship packages are looking like at this point to kind of address your money issue, what registration looks like, as you know, we're planning to try to get that launched in March. And we'll have a better idea when we're running hard numbers on those registration costs and the sponsor numbers to look at where we would sit financially for revenue offsetting expenses. That's obviously, we're being very detailed in that process, trying to look at offerings that will be able to move to a fully virtual world if necessary, so that SPJ can benefit financially as much as possible from those offerings, and also those vendors or sponsors and attendees can get what they wanted from a live or a hybrid event if it needs to be fully virtual. So as we get further along, those financial projections will be easier to have available.
Did that answer your 4 questions, Andy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is the end of people who have raised their hand from the public. One last call before the board discusses this. Does anyone from the public? I see Hastings' hand up.
I'd just like to also make a comment and encourage the board to continue the hybrid option, at least for today. They're vaccinating about 1.5 million people a day right now. I saw a story in Bloomberg last week said by the summer, the number should be about 4.5 million. So by September, there's every reason to think that anyone who wants to get a vaccine should have that option. Secondly, I've heard a few people say that they don't feel comfortable going no matter what, and they would still have that option, right? It's just a matter of giving someone a choice to go if they want to. No one who doesn't want to go virtually in person would have to in either case. So those people are still covered if that choice remains on the table. So I just want to make those 2 points quickly and encourage the board to continue the hybrid option, at least for today.
Thank you, Hastings. Last call for anyone from the audience. Seeing none, let's have a board discussion about this. I mean, I think the decision before us is hybrid or virtual. If everyone could mute too while we have this discussion until it's the board members' time to talk, that would be helpful. Just to set it up a little bit more, as you guys all know, I'm meeting with chapters all over the country this year virtually. And this week I had calls with Alabama, Michigan, and Utah. And obviously this was a point of discussion. And yes, of course, there were people who say that they don't want to come and wouldn't come no matter what the circumstances are. But there were also people who said that saying at this point that we're going to be hybrid for now makes a lot of sense because it covers the broadest range of people, which is, and that's ultimately just before we kick it off to the board discussion, that's where I come down on this, is that I think that think back to 2 months ago, there was no vaccines authorized. As Haston just said, 1.5 million Americans are getting vaccinated a day. That could triple by summer. There are some people who say we might have herd immunity by April. So there are troubling trends, but there are positive signs as well. And 7 months is an eternity. And I will say that this conversation today was great. People shared some powerful thoughts, some really strong concerns, and a really good rationale to kind of hold, for lack of a better term. And I will just say lastly that I'm really glad that we surveyed the membership. 300 people, that's a fair amount of people. And what you heard is about 125 said that they would be likely to go. If we're talking about 250 people that would make this convention what we expect it to be, that we're halfway there at this point. And given the timing and uncertainty with vaccinations, I have full faith and confidence that we could double that or more. And we can always, I was really grateful to hear from Katie that the switch from hybrid to virtual would be easy and that we have the technology available to do so. I think Beiling raises some interesting questions about equity, but I also think that those questions are there in any year. You know, they're heightened with the pandemic. There's no question communities of color are disproportionately affected by this. But those are decisions, as you've heard from people, you know, if they want to go, they can go. And as Erwin pretty well said, there are people who look forward to this. And so I don't want to belabor the point, but that's where I feel that's kind of where I came in before the meeting. And I'm more confident after hearing Katie's comments, particularly, as well as from the membership, you know, that this is going to be a divided vote. But what summed it up for me was this covers the broadest range of people. And that's, I feel, I can sleep easy tonight voting this way. I don't know how the board feels, but I think it's the smartest decision for now. And it doesn't change what we might do in April. And as you heard, we could even punt in April to June. We might want to do it much later than that. But I think this would be a good conversation to have again in April. And so with that, I will kick it off to the board in the order with which they raise their hands. I see Lauren first. And why don't we do this rather than go back and forth with discussions? Please make your points, figure this is your chance at the mic, and we'll go through the line and then we can take a vote. And so Lauren, and then I see Raphael.
Thanks, Matt. And I agree with just about everything you said. I think that this is a really great discussion. And I think that some really important points were raised and that the staff provided some really good information. But I also think the way that John framed it at the beginning is the right way to look at it. We don't need to make a decision now about what's going to happen in September. By choosing to continue to pursue a hybrid model now, we're leaving the door open to make a decision when we have more information. And as a result of that, I'd like to make a motion, and I move that we continue to pursue a hybrid model and revisit the issue at the April 16th board meeting. I also agree that we may discuss it then and may need to move to June depending upon all of the developments that are out there, but it's important that we have a motion on the floor and to discuss. So that's my motion.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Second from Beiling. Okay, let's have some continued discussion on that. Lauren, are you done with your comments?
I guess there's one thing that I want to say, because I know this came up more than once from more than one person, and that's about everybody's health and safety. while every single board member comes to this table with different backgrounds and different life experiences, there's one thing I know that we're all united and agree on, and that's that everybody's health and safety is number one. So I just want everybody who's here and who may watch this recording later to know and understand that that is the most important thing to us. And by approving the motion that I've made today, what we're doing is we're saying we are going to get more information in a very fluid, evolving situation. So when we do ultimately need to make a decision because of time pressures, we're making it with everybody's health and safety in mind and the best available information during a very fluid situation.
Thank you. Yeah. And I don't think it needs to be part of your motion, but I would hope that if the board resumes this conversation in April, that John and Katie come back to us with more concrete answers on liability questions, which Rebecca raised really legitimately, and a better sense of what's happening on the ground, and what we might be with hotel negotiations, all of which are important parts of this conversation. Raphael, you're next.
First of all, I wanted to agree with Lauren there and thank her for those the last comments that she made, because you know, when we talk about different things and when we talk about what our differing opinions may be, it sometimes may sound like, you know, I don't think you're interested in the same things I am. I certainly believe that everybody on this board is interested in protecting the health and safety of our members. My feeling throughout this conversation has been that we're gambling with something I'm not comfortable gambling with. So for me, the question is, you know, are we going to pull the plug on anything in person? And when are we going to pull that plug? This motion does not tell us that we're pulling the plug today, or that we're not, or that we're never pulling the plug. So I'm comfortable with this motion the way it's worded. We can come back in April and make that decision. The thing I want to be really clear on is the liability that we face as an association if we decide in April or June to go all virtual. Are we? I just feel so much like we're gambling on the goodwill of the hotel to come back and say, okay, fine, 140,000 is a little steep given what we're going through. I don't know that they're going to, you know, what's the risk of us waiting until much later? Is there a significant risk of putting off this decision? Because at some point, we're going to need to pull the plug. And in April, we're going to come back and say, well, let's make it June. And then in June, you know, we're going to have to make a decision. How much more will it cost us to make that decision in June as opposed to today? I'm not comfortable knowing what the answer to that question is right now. So that's my question. Is there a significant difference in the cost of pulling the plug today as opposed to pulling the plug in June?
John and Katie.
Well, so speaking purely contractually, so there is there will be a $10,000 difference if we pulled the plug today versus pulled the plug in
June,
April, or any time up to the day before the convention. So if they were just staying strict to the contract. So in a sense, 10,000 out of 146 to 157, that's pretty negligible in order to us to make a good decision. Plus, I do think, as Katie said, further down the road, if conditions warrant it, the hotel will be more receptive to conversations. You're right. We're gambling a little bit that the hotel will be, you know, willing to do that. Katie, Karen, and I did visit with the hotel. I do feel their staff is sincere. I do feel it's a good property. They're professional property. They don't want to burn bridges by acting completely, inconsiderate of our needs and thoughts as well. So, you know, I think we have an opportunity later, a better opportunity than we would today to have that conversation.
So if I think that it will save lives, and entertain my thought here. If I think it will save lives for us to go all virtual, I can vote now to go all virtual. That's not on the table, I understand that. I can vote now to go all virtual and oppose this motion. or I can wait until June, and at most that delay in my decision will cost SPJ $10,000, $11,000.
Yes, yeah, that's the way. Yeah, that's.
And we're talking about the hard numbers, not
Right.
not dealing with human beings after the fact. I understand that.
Yeah, and know that we will
Make that
communicate about this event as a hybrid event. Our members will recognize that that's what it is. Our members will know that, that option is available to us to go all virtual should we need to. So there will be no time between now or April or June. There will be no time ever that we would force anybody to go to this thing, right? So, but especially between now and then, everyone will likely probably wait to see what further action is taken. But those who do register for the virtuals component automatically, they're set, they're ready to go. Those who are wanting to be in person, if we switch them over to a virtual down the road, they'll at least be aware that that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam. Then.
Okay. And just one of the thoughts I have, I want to put this out there too, is I think the beauty of this membership survey we did in recent weeks is that we can duplicate it, and we should duplicate it before April if the board decides to pause on this decision, so that we have another set of data and we can gauge how it changed over the course of 6 weeks or so. I don't see another board member's hand, but who wants to go next? Rebecca.
Good discussion, everyone. Thank you. Abby asked about if we reached out to the other organizations. I have. With NABJ, I've talked to Ken Lemon, Vice President, Cheryl Smith, Secretary Treasurer. They made the decision out of safety. That's it. They want to make sure none of their members, get sick. They'll wait for a great one the following year if possible. I talked to Nora Lopez, President of NAHJ, McNelly Torres. By the way, all these people are members of SPJ too. McNelly Torres and at large with NHJ. Same thing, safety, that's all it was. Very simple. Erwin talked about, and I hope I'm not misquoting him on here, but how it reflects on the organization, how will it affect NABJ and NHJ? They both don't feel, and I'm a member of NHJ, I need to renew with NABJ, but they don't feel it's affected them at all. In fact, last year, their conference was very successful, and I think their conference cost like 200 or maybe more, maybe 300. I think I paid 300 just to go to the conference. They don't think it's going to affect them at all. In fact, it's a very positive move, taking it virtual, because again, it's not about, and again, I didn't get into the loss of money. Several of them had negotiated with their hotels. I made sure I reached out to them, because if I'm coming to you with information, I want you to know that I went straight to the people making decisions. About vaccination, several of you brought up the vaccinations will be more, triple, double, whatever. I cover the vaccinations in Dallas, Texas. Certain communities, they're not getting them. The privileged communities, yes, they are. And so I haven't, I have to wait in line like everybody else. I don't have underlying issues. I'm only 62, so I can't get it because I haven't hit the elderly point or whatever they consider. I just got a message from somebody, a friend, 43 years old, a teacher who teaches face-to-face, thought everybody at the school was fine. He just died at a local hospital. So, it's up to you guys. It's up to you guys, but I'm covering this. And, hey, more power to you guys if you want to get together. But I think about that a lot, I ask you all, just go see someone on a ventilator. It is horrible. Lastly, I wanted to say that, I've reached out to 7 high-profile journalists that work for the networks. I'm not going to mention names, very high profile, they're very good friends of mine, to be part of Super Sessions. By the way, I'm the program convention chair. And all of them, as of now, they said, yeah, Rebecca will be there. Well, we may have it in person in New Orleans. Nope, can't go. They're not even traveling to do speaking engagements right now. Some of them in the TV business, we have ratings months. November is a big ratings month. Some of them hope by November they'll be able to travel, but right now they can't even go do speeches. Interesting, last night I was watching Jimmy Kimmel. He hasn't gotten on a plane, he says, since March of last year. And so, you know, I've already been, they're going to be at our convention if the program committee, we decide, these are really high profile people that you guys see all the time. They're willing to come, but they won't be there in person. One person who's very high profile, he told me that he'd be willing to travel, but what he doesn't want to do is quarantine for 14 days because that means he can't cover some of these high profile stories that he's on. And so while we may have a hybrid and, you know, 200 or 300 people may show up, some of these major players with big names may not go. They'll be there virtually. And a big draw to many of our conventions are the big names. You know, the big names, or the big authors, the big, you know, correspondents who take people on. And that's a concern of mine too. So sorry I had to wear both hats, you know, but I wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bailing.
Thanks, Matt. So I just kind of want to go over the different angles to help me process my own thinking. And thank you to Raphael for asking about the financial impact of waiting, because that wasn't on my radar. So let me recap. From a financial standpoint, if we pull the plug today, contractually, it's $146,000. If we wait to pull the plug until April or later, it's $157,000. So there's an increase in financials from a contracting standpoint. Rebecca raised a good point, as did others, about the legal piece. And even though there is this legislation in place in New Orleans, there's a liability piece to this. I appreciated Lauren reifying that all of us have our members' health and safety as the top concern. And I think what we're hearing in this conversation is that COVID has had really disproportionate impacts on different communities from the standpoint of health and safety. And then from the standpoint of equity, I know that SPJ has a strategic plan in which diversity, equity, and inclusion play a really big role. I know, having worked with Matt, and the reason that I agreed to be on this board is to support the leadership's efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to the point of equity, I just want to point out that actions always speak more loudly than words, right? And what we're talking about with the hybrid conference, and this was reflected in the comments, it's reflected in the chat, is the hybrid conference reifies and reinforces existing inequities. It just does. There have always been inequities about who can go to a conference, who can afford to stay at the Hyatt, who has that in-person networking opportunity, and who doesn't. And the hybrid conference just absolutely reifies that, right? So the last thing that I want to say is things are really uncertain, and we can kick this decision off to April for sure. And in some ways that preserves our broadest range of options for sure. But in a situation where literally everything in the world is uncertain, sometimes the best gift that leaders can give their members is the gift of certainty. And so if we vote to pull the plug today, there are all these other considerations, but at least we'll know what we're doing.
Thanks, Bailing. John, I see your hand up.
There we go. Thanks. And so I wanted to just make a point to, as a reminder, that and member safety is clear and first and foremost in my mind and Katie's mind and Karen's mind and all the staff as well, which is, you know, there's a great chance that this will still be a virtual event. So the decision today is, do we make this a virtual event today, or do we wait and a little bit later to see what might happen? I just wanted to then call out to the board, because as the board, you're the only ones looking at the financial ramifications of this, right? That's your charge. That's why you're a board, is fiscal stewardship. And I just want to remind you that $146,000 penalty would cut our reserves in half. Now, what does that mean practically speaking? It means that we have cut through our reserves by almost $750,000 in 4 years. So that means
Join the meeting.
We probably would have no reserves and it would start eating into operating expenses. So but you'd be handing that to the next board. In addition, then that means then operational expenses are largely contained in staff positions and programming. And we do have ambitious goals in programming for diversity, equity, inclusion in our strategic plan. And I just want to say from my perspective as someone that, is trying to help lead the staff efforts to get those things going, just saying goodbye to $146,000 today that could eventually be leveraged and used to further the programmatic efforts of this organization. Yes, it makes a statement, but it certainly puts us in a precarious situation. And I just want to give you the license to wear that board hat of fiscal responsibility as well, and to say, is that the best use? If you could spend $146,000 of SPJ's money, is that the best use for it? Is to make a statement today. And I understand it's a powerful statement, but that's an expensive one too. And I'm just going to share that because it's really front and center in my mind.
Jerry.
John, I want to thank you for that impassioned statement that you just made. And Lauren, I also want to thank you for setting up the motion because member safety is important. But I don't think any human life is worth $149,000. And I just did the math because there are other ways to make money. We have roughly 6,000 members in this organization. And if we presented this like if we pull the plug, we're going to lose this. And I'm not saying we should do this. I just did some math. If each one of the 20,000, if each person in the organization gave an extra $20, that's $150,000. And that covers the loss that we would take. So I don't know if I could fully get behind this. I'm very torn about this. I understand the fiscal responsibility as a board member. I really understand it because I believe in watching money. But I also am just wondering if we do have an in-person hybrid one and someone does get sick and sues us for millions, would it have been cheaper for us to just take the $149,000 loss or whatever the amount was, $146,000 loss, as opposed to being sued for $2 or $3 million. So I'm on the fence. I'm still open to suggestions and I'm listening. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jerry. Lauren.
Thanks, Matt. So one thing on the financial point, because I know Raphael asked what it would cost if we decided to pull the plug later on. That's based on what's written in the contract at this moment. That's not based on my understanding from John and Katie what the discussion has been, because we don't know the future, nobody does. If for at least a couple of months we make a good faith effort to plan a hybrid, and if the I don't know right now what I would do because I don't have enough information to make a decision about September. And I think that's what you saw in a lot of the survey results. Most people said they'd make a decision 3 months out. That's June. So if we continue to make a good faith effort and the situation and circumstances are such from a public health standpoint that we don't feel comfortable, my understanding from what Katie said is that they would be willing to negotiate and that it would be less money. And I don't think that takes away at all from our commitment to safety to wait to get more information. And also, I know people here have expressed views about what they think the legal position is. I'd like to get our lawyers' views before any decision is made. So I ask for support for my motion so we can do all of those things.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, please, Raphael, go ahead before.
Thank you, Lauren. I absolutely agree with you. And I wanted to make clear that when I asked about the difference in liability between today and June, the question and the answer was, what's under the contract, and that tells us what our maximum liability would be. I did hear what they said, that it might actually be lower, and it would be lower for these completely logical reasons. I understand that for a decision-making purpose, I need to consider the maximum liability, and that's what's in the contract. So it's not that I'm not agreeing with you. It's just a little bit of a different way of looking at it. You're absolutely
and
right.
I completely agree with you. I just wasn't sure after that conversation that everybody else was thinking that way.
I think we're all clear now. Thank you.
I'd like to hear from other board members who haven't spoken yet. Claire or the Yvettes.
What I wanted to mention was, since this meeting today was about the convention, and we are all giving our opinion as to the legalities, it's come across to all of us that it's imperative that we get the legal point of view. So the lawyer's perspective is very much needed. And I'm just surprised that it's not known for today's meeting, since this was the meeting that we were discussing in terms of the convention. We definitely need to know moving forward what that's gonna, how that's gonna define all of this moving forward. That being said, I'm all for team virtual. I know everyone's expressing their views as to waiting till later on, but for me, everyone's life is more important to me. And I understand a lot of people are like, well, this is SPJ. This is how our conventions have been in the past, where we see each other. Of course, I want to see all of you guys. Oh my God, of course we all do. And it's just unfortunate that we're in this predicament. But I rather feel confident knowing I'm seeing you here than then finding out you're sick or a family member sick because someone else gave it to them by having visited our convention because they were asymptomatic. So that's my take on it, but definitely making sure we have the lawyer's perspective on the financial part of it in regards to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Yvette Walker.
Everyone has been really giving good discussion. I appreciate it. I think the board appreciates it. And I am leaning toward virtual, but here's why I plan to vote hybrid today. There's more information that I need to know. Basically everything that's been said. I know there's a concern about spending an extra $10,000 if we were to make the decision later. But what I don't think we've heard is when would that date be? So if we do not vote to hold it virtual today, and we want to wait a little bit, is there a date where, or is today the day that the 146 would increase? Do we know if there's a date?
I think it's March 1st,
Maybe.
John.
It's soon, yeah. It's written as a certain number of days from the day of the event. So I calculated it one day, but it was early March.
I'm trying to pull it up right now, but it's either 171 or 179 days pre-start date of the convention, which would be the first day our room block starts.
So one idea would be for people who want that information, to give us the week to get that information, and then meet again to vote. But there's a lot of information, and then also that people would really not make a decision until 3 months out. So while personally, I probably would like a virtual, I think that it's prudent to go for the hybrid vote today.
Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I came to the meeting today favoring virtual, but I appreciate the discussion and all the points made. And I'd say I'd give hybrid another consideration, and with the extension of time and gathering more information. And I have the pleasure of serving on the Convention Planning Committee. And I am concerned about starting to invite speakers and get things in place for that, but I believe we can forge ahead with our planning if hybrid is still on the table until April. And I just want to make sure, so the plan would be to revisit and rediscuss on April 17th. And that would be the day that we would say whether we would determine whether hybrid is an option or not. Is that correct?
Well, I think what I was hearing is that there's, it sounds like there's a division on the board about what to do, but that some people are willing to delay. And just to emphasize what has been said by others, I want to make very clear that we all take public safety first and foremost. And so a delay doesn't minimize that, doesn't change that, doesn't do anything to negate that. It makes no decision. As others have said, even Yvette, who just said she's leaning virtual, but is willing to wait a while longer. So to answer your question, Claire, I think delaying till April is the motion. And I think that is what I personally support. That said, I think we can meet then, and it sounds like from our members, if the calculus on the board changes, then it will change and we can vote to shift gears, but that the latest we could decide is June, based on what our members are telling us, that they need at least 3 months to decide. So April, and we meet again, and maybe at that decision, based on what information we have from the lawyers, from New Orleans, amongst ourselves, and from our membership survey, we could make a decision then to go all virtual, or we could punt one last time to June.
So then what's the motion now? Do we need to clarify that motion that was made earlier?
I think the motion was to continue hybrid, pursuing hybrid to April 17th.
Based on the information that we'll get from Katie and John.
Correct. Correct.
And also our attorney.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll provide.
And our attorney, yes.
Yeah, and we'll provide everything you've requested today are in the minutes. We'll make sure everything is presented on that day if we were to go forward that way. So it would, but like Matt said, you could at that point still, it's always up to you to say, okay, well, we still could wait a little bit longer yet, or you make that decision that day.
Lauren, does that summarize the motion? I don't want to.
Yes, between what you said and what John said, yes.
Okay. I see Bailing and then Raphael. John, I'm sorry. Did you have something to add? Okay. Bailing and then Raphael.
No, it was Jerry saying something.
I think she might need to restate it because there's been some.
Yeah.
10-4. Yeah. Lauren,
Yeah,
why
that's why I
don't you do
mentioned
that?
that it needed to be restated, yeah, and clarified.
Please do that, and then we'll go to Bailing and Raphael.
Okay, that we continue to pursue the hybrid model and revisit the issue at the April 16th board meeting. And I can add, I didn't previously have in the motion, but I think there was an understanding that in the meantime, we would get the requested information from staff and our attorney, and I'm happy to add that to the motion.
Just one thing, Lauren, you just said April 16th, which is a Friday.
Oh, I was picking the date
17th.
out of John's presentation, so my apologies. If the board meeting is the 17th, then it should be the 17th.
Yeah, okay. So those are the three components, just for clarity, to continue to pursue hybrid, discuss on April 17th, and get the answers to our questions from staff and the lawyers. Bailing.
I just have a request for Katie, which is for the April meeting. I don't remember the timing of when you're supposed to be deciding on the vendor for the hybrid. Whoever it may be, could we get an explicit articulation from the bidders of how they will address equity between the virtual and in-person experiences? Thank you.
Thank you, Bailing. Raphael.
Just wanted to read a comment that was made in chat into the record here. It's the comment from Andy, and it says, you can still favor virtual yet support Lauren's motion. Katie says we're preserving our bargaining position by continuing to think about it. The whole board might favor virtual today, yet follow the advice. I am in full agreement with that. I don't see us having anything in person this year. I think the risk is too great. But I think that, and I would hope that members, by the way, I'm speaking for myself now and not for Andy, but I would hope that enough members communicate with us that it is too soon to take this kind of risk for a early September conference. But in the interest of both preserving our bargaining position and also changing my mind if circumstances allow for it, okay, I'm inclined to vote yes on those grounds, and facts may change, and those facts will change my mind. I really think that we need to make a decision, a very good decision about protecting everybody's health before any dollar amount is even entering into the equation. Thank you.
Good note to end on, Raphael. Why don't we call for the vote?
I make a motion for us
Oh,
to.
wait a minute, wait a minute,
Oh,
wait a minute.
yeah,
Can I
Rebecca
say
had something to say.
Matt?
Go ahead.
I'd like to say something. Yeah, I'm leaning towards virtual myself, of course, but willing to hear the, put a pause on or do the hybrid analysis again. But I will say to any of the members of SPJ on this virtual call, since I am the head of the planning committee for the convention, one of the things I've told people already that I'm inviting is, it's a 50-50 deal. Whether I didn't know if we were going to do face-to-face, hybrid, or virtual, but I said, if you can't come, we'll bring you in via Zoom, because I'd hate to lose somebody just because they're not going to go to the hybrid. So for you people, especially, the freelance committee who, thank you for all your proposals, let them know that, if they don't feel comfortable coming, or they can't afford it, we'll bring them in virtually. I'd hate to lose a great panel because of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for underscoring that. I think you have a unanimous agreement on that point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to mention. We definitely want our members to enjoy the benefits of all the great workshops we have, because this is a great organization and we've been working really hard throughout the years to make sure that we provide professional development. So of course, our safety is what we're discussing here besides monetary values, but I'm also open now to hearing more on the legalities and on the costs and how it'll affect us for our next meeting. But because we definitely want to keep our members in, we definitely want them to not lose an opportunity to partake of the convention, just like the other ones are doing it as well. So. And I think now I don't know if anyone else had anything to say. We're making a motion now to end the meeting.
Motion was by Lauren, and Bei Ling, you seconded it. I just want to confirm that with that third element that you support the most recent motion.
I support the amended motion.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you for a healthy discussion, which will be healthier in April. I really appreciate everyone's time today.
And move we adjourn.
Got a second on that?
Lauren, you didn't give me a chance. I was making the motion before.
Yvette, I'm giving you the motion to Yvette, you get the motion to adjourn. Lauren, you can be the second.
That's fine.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate it. Stay safe.
Conversation.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.